You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host. And today we're going to cover market-aware advertising in the Amazon ecosystem as a whole. I got some great friends, partners, supporters of the network over at Perpetua, and have Franz Jordan on today, who's going to just going to have a great conversation across the board on what next level advertising looks like. I know a lot of conversations are there right now. Spend data, retail media networks are popping up everywhere. Amazon has been the tried and true way, but it's also gotten a lot more complicated. But Franz, I'm going to kick it over to you. If you want to do a brief intro on yourself, Perpetua, that would be awesome. And then we can kind of jump into the conversation. Sound good?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Franz. I founded a software company back in 2014 called Celix, which back then was one of the very first Amazon SEO softwares globally. As Amazon rolled out advertising and as advertising became more and more important, we shifted our focus from Amazon SEO more to the Amazon paid media side, and grew a lot in this space. Eventually got acquired by Perpetua about a year ago in April 2022. And so since then, I am in the Perpetua team, and I work on a new product called Prism, which is basically a market intelligence solution for Amazon. So that's my context. So I've been in the Amazon space and specifically following the Amazon advertising industry for many years now. I'd say since 2015, very, very closely. And happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, awesome. So when we talk about this is what's happened, I think, is as everything's gotten more and more complicated, things have gotten more expensive. There's a lot more competition that's out there, and people are struggling to understand, how do I get to the next level? How do we become best in class? How am I just not another advertiser? And so I know we done a webinar a few weeks back around this topic, and it was kind of out of that I said, hey, how can we get this into a podcast where everybody can download and listen to it? And so you want to, from your standpoint, just being in this space for so long, where we were at and how brands viewed advertising to where we're at right now and how they need to be thinking about it. And then we can jump into what does the future look like? So maybe that can be these three segments we break it into. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think, if you think back in the very early days of advertising, 2015, 16, 17, when Amazon were just basically starting in that space, I think that phase, I would call it phase the early days, where it was very simple to run ads. Effectively, you were running auto campaigns on Amazon with sponsored products. CPCs were in the low cents, right? 5 cents, 10, 15,
the
20
good old
cents.
days.
So the good old days, right?
Brand side, those were amazing, right?
So basically, there's nothing you can do wrong. The moment you run ads, you're basically winning, and life was simple and easy. So I think those were the early days. And now I think that the natural evolution, as you see with any advertising platform, not just with Amazon really, is that over time, those platforms tend to get more and more complex. And now, why do they tend to get more complex? Well, because those platforms want to make more revenue from their ads, right? And so how do you do it? Well, first, you increase the volume, which typically means you add more and more ad formats. So you go from sponsored products to brands, display to DSP, and all the things that Amazon released on over the years. So this increases the volume. And the other thing is that you try to increase the value of each click and each impression. And how do you do that? Well, you empower advertisers to target users or shoppers in this case more granularly and more specifically, so that you, as an advertiser, you can determine the value of a shopper very precisely, and then you will be willing to bid the highest possible amount. And so those two trends lead to an increase in complexity because you have more ad formats. Platforms typically give you more levers to reach those shoppers, and they also give you more data on the shoppers than the advertisers. And so overall, the world just gets more and more complex. And so I think that the early days, if that was let's say the first era, then I think somewhere around 2018 or so, I'd say we moved into the second era. which is an era where we went from data scarcity to data abundance, and where Amazon started to give more and more control to advertisers. And I think that, in this area, and I'd say we're still in this era to some degree, it's just gotten a lot more complicated, a lot more complex, a lot more knobs that you can turn, but also a lot more data points that you have to digest. And so I think that today, obviously, everyone knows it's not enough to just run auto campaigns and get clicks for 10 cents. It's a lot more complicated. And I think that today, if you want to win in today's market, really what you need to do is you need to be able to digest all of this data and make sense of it, and then apply it on those different advertising formats. So I think that's where we stand today. And I think it's a difficult position for many advertisers and brands that we talk to, because it's almost overwhelming, the possibilities that you have today. But I think that's the natural way that those platforms tend to evolve.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be you could get along back when I was on the brand side. Like, I didn't need tech either to help me out, right? You're just dumping money in, and you're literally printing money. I couldn't spend enough, because I remember thinking if I was spending 75 cents on an ad, like, having started at a nickel to a dime, that was huge. But I think, as you were tracking it, that 2018, maybe 2019, like all of a sudden ad tech popped on, and that was the next level. If you got ad tech, all of a sudden, you were able to beat others just because you could change bids fast enough. And that then required a different skill set. Right? You had to know how to use the ad tech. So now it's eating up more time. And there's also this evolution at that point in time is you couldn't just have a random person doing it.
Right.
Right? You couldn't just have, associate just working on it. You had to all of a sudden start having a strategic plan built around it, because now that ad tech tool could spend all your money in a day. And then what does that look like? Right? And if it did, that was great. Right. Because something.
I think another trend that you see very often happen is that users just get a lot more specialized, and as a result of this, also a lot more sophisticated. You have agencies pop up, right? If you think back in 16, 17s, you hardly had some Amazon SEO agencies, but you certainly didn't have any advertising agencies. And so as the world gets more complex, there's the need for more specialized and sophisticated people that run those ads. And typically specifically for smaller brands, it's hard to hire and train and retain those people. And so agencies rise. And so that's certainly the other trend that you see, right? Tech rises and then agency rises.
It's funny. I wasn't thinking about that. When I was first looking for an Amazon agency, I was not considering it for my paid media at all, because it was so simple to do. It was more along the lines of the content. Right. Help me build out the landing pages, the A+ detail pages back in the day. Like, that's what I was looking for. Optimization, communication with the vendor manager, help with AVNs. Yep. I wasn't thinking about it from advertising at all.
When was that?
So that was like 2016, 2015, 2016.
Yeah. And that makes sense. Huh?
Yeah, I still needed an agency, but I wasn't thinking about it from paid media standpoint, because it was so simple. I mean, we were dabbling in AMG at the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which was a disaster for me, right? Like a ROAS of 72 cents on the dollar. But they're like, oh, the halo effect.
Yeah, of course.
The halo,
always halo, no?
We didn't hit above, 1 on the ROAS, and all of a sudden we got the halo effect. But if we randomly did a campaign where it hit a 2, they didn't even bring up the halo effect.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, Halo is always a convenient explanation when results are not as expected. Huh?
Yeah. They're also telling me how much. Oh, they could read all the brand awareness studies and tell me how much the lift was in store, which I don't. They never actually could do that. I don't think.
Back then in 2015, I don't know. Maybe today with Whole Foods they could, in some stores, but overall, yeah.
Yeah. But yes. So where are brands winning today? What does that look like? Because, what's happened over the past couple of years is everybody's jumped in. And I mean, ad tech is freely available to everybody now, right?
Right.
For a while, it was just with the big agencies. And then now, I mean, it's everywhere. It's easy to get to. So what do people need to be thinking about? I would say, first of all, like to set themselves apart. Maybe it's on the content side, maybe it's on, the competition side. Anyways, I got name 50 more things, but I'd rather.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, the way that we always look at it at Perpetua is, it raises the floor, but it also raises the ceiling, right? So that's basically how we look at the past couple of years. And so I think that today, if you think about the most cutting edge things, what are those? Well, I think that AMC is certainly one of the big topics, right? That you see around. So the big trend that I see is that today, most advertisers will look at ad formats individually and they say, what's my ROAS on sponsored products and sponsored brands and then sponsored display and then potentially DSP as well. But really, the journey on Amazon typically touches a lot more than just one advertising format, right? Shoppers click on sponsored brands and then they go to the shop and then they would buy on the PDP and click again on sponsored product or so. So I think that the big trend today is, if you want to be the cutting edge advertiser, is how do you attribute accurately and how do you track success accurately across different advertising formats? And how do you trace that journey really end to end and not just last click? And I think that so far it's been close to impossible to do this. I think it's still incredibly hard to do it, but at least you can do it if you have access to AMC and if you have, back to your point, if you have the people on your team that can pull this data and can process this data from AMC. But I think that if you're able to properly attribute cost of acquisition and also using AMC properly able to calculate lifetime value, you are you have an advantage over competitors because when you can spend more, but you also know when you cannot spend more. And so I think it's really understanding those moments where looking at proper cost of acquisition and proper lifetime value, it's actually still profitable. Whereas most competitors, if they just look at shorter lifetime value or shorter acquisition journey, they would not be able to compete with this anymore. So I think that's overall the big differentiator I see, right now, where this is really the innovation frontier, I'd say, in this space. There are certainly individual tactics and strategies that work for some categories or some niches and depending on your product, but holistically, across the board, I think the ability to track across advertising formats is probably the big differentiator today.
So when we think about Amazon Marketing Cloud, how do people explain that to the executive team? Right? There's always things I like to pull out because the executive teams need to be educated. They just don't have the time to sit down, for hours and hours and hours a week to understand something in depth. Amazon Marketing Cloud, and then you hear from the executive, hey, what does this mean? And are we using it?
Yeah.
What's the?
I mean, the way it was explained to me, because technically it's a clean room, right? But then the question is, what is a clean room, and how do you have that discussion, right? So I think that the way it was explained to me once, actually from the AMC expert and on the Perpetua team, is imagine a room where all the people that bought your products are inside of that room, and you can only communicate with the people in that room by kind of slipping a survey under the door, and basically ask the group in an anonymous way, right? And so imagine that you want to ask all your customers, hey, before you bought my product, did you click on a DSP banner and did you then click on a sponsored products banner? And then imagine that all those customers in the room fill out that survey, and then you get the aggregated results back. So you are not able to get individual shopper information. You cannot say this one shopper did this and that, but you can get feedback from your entire customer base, and you can ask very detailed questions to your customer base. But so that's basically how it was explained to me, and I kind of like this idea. So to basically survey or poll your entire Amazon customer base for their behavior. That's kind of how I try to explain AMC today.
And they're unknowingly filling out the survey based on, did they click on an ad? Were they shown an ad? Right? How do they handle search? They're unknowingly filling out this survey. And then if they buy, they end up in the room. Right.
Yes. It's a good way to look at it. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously not that they actually fill out the survey. Yeah. It's just
I love that.
Amazon tracks all the data.
Survey, they don't even know it.
Right. Exactly.
So when they buy, they go into the room.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. It's like you fill out the survey the moment you buy, the moment you hit order.
Yeah.
Also, your survey your data goes into the pool and say, "Hey, welcome to the club." Right. So yeah, I think that's a very good way to look at it.
And then you can, because I think it's really important right now. I mean, belts are getting tightened right now. People want to be more focused with how they're spending.
Yeah.
And to your point, if you can have that data, and you can then trim out the lower value customers from the higher value customers, or the less likely to convert into the more likely to convert. And that doesn't mean just anymore, it's just DSP, right? Or it's just, PPC ads. It's just this group that does these 4 things together, and then spreading the budget across those 4 things and then targeting those people.
That's exactly right. I mean, it gives you a lot more granularity with targeting, and it effectively allows you. It's just more granular targeting. I mean, at the end, this is always the way to get bids up. Basically, as a platform, is you give more and more granularity. Because if you think about it, if you had 100% certainty that the next shopper or the next person that would click on your banner would buy your product for $1,000. You'd be willing to spend what, like $200 or something like this, like probably at 20%. If you had 100% certainty that would happen, right?
Yeah.
The reason you're not willing to pay $200 is because you don't know whether they're going to buy, right? Now, the more certain you are that someone is going to buy, the more you'll be able, or the higher you'll be willing to pay for that click, right? And so by giving you all this granularity and these insights, and by giving you the ability to target, Amazon basically gives you more certainty on the value of the next click, and therefore advertisers are willing to bid more, right? So I think that's this part. And now the other part, and I think that's always a bit forgotten, right? Because if you take a step back, advertising at the end is just lifetime value over cost of acquisition. And now, this sounds very simple. Now, in reality, it's very difficult to track this and to calculate this. But I think Amazon is in a very good position. So the one type of service that you can do with your room of customers is, what was your journey to buy this product? But the other type of service you can do is, what other products did you buy? And how often do you buy from me, and so on. So AMC also gives you the ability to quantify lifetime value much better, which in some categories, I mean, think about the supplement space. Incredible, right? The repeat purchases are very high, and the reason why ROAS on the first purchase is typically very low, right? Like 0.5 or something like this, and people are happy with that is because they know that they will come back every month or every 2 months or so on, right? So quantifying the value, and that basically means the lifetime value, what other products will they buy, how often they come back, and so on. And then being able to properly assess the true cost of acquisition, the fully loaded cost of acquisition, not just the last click, really puts you in the best possible position to bid the right amount or to pay the right amount for every shopper.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. I want to pick your brain just based off, previous chats we've had around like market intelligence, competitive analysis. How should, this isn't something that is something people have thought about, you want to know about, but then leveraging it for your advertising strategy. Like I'd love to jump into that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the next era. So if we're currently the second era or the second stage, I think the next stage is going to be to incorporate market data and competitive data. Because if you think about it today, advertising is almost entirely driven just by your own data and your own goals, right? So if you say a goal, you look like, what's my margin, and you choose keywords based on your own data, and everything is just based on your own data. But now if you look at Amazon, there is hardly a page or a view on Amazon where your product is by its own. Usually you'll have many competitor products on the same screen. And so if competition is always just one click away, then competition will have a big impact on your performance. And so I think that given the importance of competition on Amazon, it is surprising how little competitive data is actually used in your advertising strategy. And so I think that that's going to be the next step of the advertising evolution. Is okay, once you have AMC and all these things incorporated, then it's going to be about how do you incorporate competitive data and market data. And so I think one of the examples that I think is that I can give to try to make this a bit more tangible is if you think about most advertisers today, when they set advertising goals, or oftentimes they will say, I want to achieve a specific organic ranking. So they will say, oh, for this keyword, I want to be number 5, or I want to be in the top 5, or something like this, right? And I think that it's great that you have a target that you want to be number 5, but the question whether this target is actually achievable or not does not only depend on what you want. It depends a lot on what is the market, and so I think that the realistic goal of what you can achieve depends a lot on your competitive set, and that competitive set is changing all the time. And so I think setting your goal in a dynamic way that basically it reflects your relative competitiveness and is one of the ways how you can leverage competitive data or competitive insights to drive your advertising.
So, but are you looking at like sales, ratings, reviews, content? Is there a source for that?
Well, I mean, I think there are things that certainly users can or brands can use, right? I think you would probably look at sales and try to identify, okay, who are the top selling ASINs in my category? Who are the ones that I can actually that I would like to compete with? But then the question is also, how competitive are you? And I think your degree of competitiveness depends on pricing, on brand strength, depends on content, depends on reviews, so it depends on a bunch of things. And so I think that I think part of the reason why it is not used that much today is because doing this in a manual way is just very complicated. So I think just as with ad tech, I think that for these type of analysis, ultimately, you will need to use software, at least if you want to scale it, right?
Yeah. No, yes, it makes sense, right? That right now the software will go through and it will connect and say, hey, if you do, this many, this DSP combined with this PPC with this display, if you do this in this order or this many times, there'll be a conversion. But there'll also be so you can optimize your spend, right? If it's a limited spend, you want to drive it to the group of customers. The next level is, then what about the group of products, right? And doing the same type of analysis. I love it. Doing on the back end, the analysis, because like you're saying, maybe top 10 isn't even realistic for you, because to get there, you're gonna have to spend so much money. It's going to be negative margin at the end of the day, right? It's not even worth it.
It's not worth it. Or just because it's not worth it today doesn't mean that it's still not going to be worth it tomorrow. And I think that's a very important part. Amazon is so dynamic. Your competitive set changes all the time, but also the strength of your competitors change all the time. Imagine that the number one bestseller in your category goes out of stock, right? So suddenly, obviously, you'll be able to your offering is a lot more competitive because your competition overall just got weaker. And now today, in order to capitalize from your competitor's weakness, it just takes some time. So the softwares today are not optimized towards competitors going out of stock and then increasing your bids very, very quickly. And I think that's kind of what in the future will be necessary. So that competitor goes out of stock, you're the first to react because you track your competitors, you realize they're out of stock. So you're the first one that increases your bids because you know that over the next couple of days, your chances of or your conversion rate will be a lot higher because the strongest competitor is out of stock. Vice versa, imagine that one of your top competitors suddenly lowers the price. So that will have a pretty negative impact on you, most likely. And so again, today, the way that most ad tech softwares work is they will notice over time that your performance has dropped. And then they will gradually reduce the bids. But by the time that your bid is low, maybe your competitor has already increased their price again. So you're always kind of behind the reality. If you don't track the drivers, but if you just track the outcomes.
And maybe so if you're at the front of this, if you start doing this now and you're ahead, maybe you're playing with your price to do that exact thing against your competition to drive it up. And their ads will drive down, and then you can trigger a massive increase in ad spend. And then not only did you get an increase in sales and conversion, maybe at a lower margin, right? Maybe at a lower margin, but all the competition that's using any ad tech is getting driven down, and then you turn yours on. And now you've just bolstered your strength at the top of that category as a number one bestseller.
I love it. That's
where
the
it's
smartest
going.
way to game the system.
But this is how like smaller brands win.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically kind of game theory, right? And so being mindful about this and anticipating the reactions of your competitors to your own moves, and basically being two steps ahead. Yeah. So I think that's a really, really good idea. That's but so look, I think
because that means we're talking the ad tech platforms need to develop that,
right?
And then test and learn, and it's going to be different for every category.
Yeah.
But then test and learn and have those two systems talking, right? Because if it is going down, it needs to be looking at the competition saying that price is down. That's why they're up. Don't turn off the advertising. Keep it up there, at least for 2 weeks, whatever it might be. That I'm playing. I'm a scientist, right? Like I'm doing the opposite. I'm experimenting on the front end
with it. And look, I mean, I think if you really think it through until the end, the question is, why should this just be limited to ads? So why is the only reaction always to change your ads? I mean, you may just as well react on the pricing side as well and make the decision to say, well, okay, if a competitor is increasing their price, you know what? I'm going to do the same, because if I increase my price, but my margin will be higher. I can bid more, and then I can outperform my competitors as well, right? So an increase in price, there are different ways that you can react to price change of competitors, I guess, right? You can follow, you can stay the same. If a competitor lowers their price, you have a higher margin, you can bid more aggressively. So maybe that's the strategy. So I think there's not one way to incorporate these things, but being aware. This is why I call this era market awareness, right? So being aware of what's happening in the market. And I also don't mean to say by this that the market data should be the only thing that you look at. Of course, you need to keep your margin in consideration, and you have your own goals as a company and so on, right? So it's not about ignoring your own data, but it's just about not just using your own data. And so that's, I think, where we're going, where we're heading.
Yeah, I think my brain just exploded. It's where it's going. It has to. I mean, but it's the evolution, right? Because you were talking about at the beginning, we had all these different silos that got added into advertising. And then we hit this era where you've got to combine it all together, right? But I'm thinking about it up until now around, hey, what does that journey, customer journey look like? And have decisions based on advertising, based on the customer journey and what's working in the combination of different ad platforms. Now, what we're saying is just how those were siloed. Now we have actual silos of how we used to look at content, pricing, competition, share of digital shelf, ratings, rankings, and reviews. We looked at all those differently. And then we clumped them all together and we said, oh, look at content, affects conversion rate, and, pricing, affects total overall traffic. We did all that. And we said, hey, we're going to look at that holistically. And now we're saying, don't treat this silo. We saw that silos were an issue, so we stopped treating them that way. And then advertising, we saw we had silos, stopped treating them that way. And now we need to say, hey, we actually created two big silos that we need to look at holistically. The people who do that are going to destroy it on Amazon quickly and then carry it over to Walmart and the next marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think Amazon is, due to the size, is always where these things tend to start. Also, where you have the most possibilities to do it, because Amazon just shares more data and has more infrastructure. Because that's very complex, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. So I think that is a natural evolution, because you're always looking for the edge. And so if you today, few brands are using AMC, but give it a year or two, everyone will be using AMC. There's going to be ad tech that makes it fairly simple to calculate your acquisition cost, to calculate your lifetime value. So that's not a differentiator anymore. So what's going to be the next differentiator? And I think the next differentiator is going to be exactly like you said, like the tearing down the silos between the advertising and, let's say, the retail side, but then also layering in this competitive view. And being responsive to changes in the market, because ultimately that's what shoppers do as well, right? So shoppers behave differently depending on what ASINs there are, what price they have, and so on.
Wow, yeah, that's awesome. Too cool. So, a question that comes up quite a bit, though, is around DSP, and I want to pick your brain on that. And then, I mean, obviously, if you have any questions for me, shoot them back my way. But the question I have is, how should people be looking at DSP? And the reason I'm thinking about it is you're talking about, AMC, few brands using it, but we're going to see a huge influx over the next year. That seems what happened like DSP. Yeah. And there's just so much available inventory at the bottom that more people are using it, but not enough. In my opinion, the conversions that I see are crazy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think DSP, and we see it at Perpetua as well. There's a huge demand for DSP, and we're investing heavily into our DSP offering. So I definitely do think that we're big believers in DSP, and I think the DSP or AMC is kind of a critical accelerator to DSP, because the main reason why people have not been using DSP is around tracking, as you said it in the beginning, right? How is the performance? And then when performance is not good, there's always this halo effect. Well, that's for many brands, that's not a particularly satisfying outlook, right? And so they've been waiting for the possibility to truly assess performance of DSP, and I think AMC is the answer to that, right? Because AMC oftentimes doesn't get the credit it deserves. We did an analysis some time ago, and we're basically looking when we shift from first click to last click, how does this actually change the performance of DSP versus sponsored products? And of course, ROAS for sponsored products went down, whereas ROAS of DSP went up, and that's just because you change the attribution. Because people obviously click on DSP first, and then they click on sponsored product last, and then so just by changing attribution, suddenly DSP looks a lot more profitable, and sponsored products looks a lot less profitable. And so I think that DSP is already, it's big, but I think the breakthrough for DSP to really become mass, to get into the masses, is going to be the ability to properly track its performance using AMC. Mm-hmm. And I think we're right there. We're at this inflection point. And it's just about making AMC more accessible to more brands and making it easier to use. And we're working on this. I assume other ad tech players are working on this as well. And so I think that we'll see a lot in this space in, I guess, 2023.
I've been picking your brain a lot. Any questions? Do you have on my side?
I mean, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts from Shop Talk, right? Whether there has been any. What's your number one takeaway, or what's been the most surprising thing for you from Shop Talk, from the conversations that you're there, from sessions?
I think the top thing for me was the CFO at Target, on stage, which sometimes the CFOs can be kind of rigid, kind of guarded. I think really opened up a lot around what they're looking at. And, things that stood out, he refers to, they're not customers, they're guests. Mm-hmm. And there's just an all around focus on the guest, which is something I think that Amazon has lost over, the past few years here. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it got to the point, he's talking about they're so focused, they're bringing in like drive up returns, which just is not great for profitability at all, but it's great for customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
Right. It is. We're all super busy. Right. And, if you can simplify the returns process, right. People love Amazon now because it's pretty cost effective, right? It's not as cheap as it used to be. There's a lot of price parity that's come back up. There's customer trust in there, and the fact that I can return whatever I bought. Right now, that's not blanketly true because there's some things you can't return, but holistically, people think of it as it's easy to return. And I make buying decisions on that where I won't buy from the brand.com, right? But I'll just go to Amazon and buy it. Where a lot of times I'd rather have it from Target because I can drive and pick it up same day. The problem is if it doesn't work out, if it doesn't fit the kid, now I got to go in, and it's this not as process. Easy. So they're going to do drive up returns. And that was something that stood out to me. The other thing is the people in the e-commerce space are so, I don't know. I love people, right? Like I love people. That's what I'm addicted to, is meeting new people, right? Yeah. And so there's so many people there. There's so much new technology right now that's grown out of this need. But at the same time, the free flowing of all the cash that's happened for the last couple of years means it's been really trimmed down to the winners, not just the flyers that were out there, but the ones who actually had a solid product. So I really enjoy walking the expo floor, like picking people's brains on the new stuff. And I was blown away by what's out there. And a lot of it is, because of AI. And it's gonna be significantly different next year. But I would assume, I wasn't there at Shop Talk, unfortunately, but I would assume that AI and the use of ChatGPT and all of this has been probably 80-90% or so of the content, or? Well, no, I would say that's top of people's mind, but it hit too close, right? I mean, people were prepping their talks a while ago, and there's not a lot of the open Q&A, right? They're not going out. Target's not going to let their CFO sit on stage and take open questions from the audience, right? So,
but certainly not the guys at Amazon.
Yeah,
Target, I don't know, but Amazon certainly not it.
But yeah, I think so. The chat, talk on it, yes. But I think by next year, the proliferation is going to be rampant. Yeah. The episode just before this one, the one that is rolling out today, was with Todd Hasselfeld over at Colgate-Palmolive around generative AI. And after that deep conversation, like my feeling is you better be getting a chief AI officer in.
Right.
It is going to touch your everything from HR. Well, obviously sales, content generation, but it's going to hit HR. It's going to hit recruiting. It's going to hit legal. It's going to touch every aspect of your organization. I was in, pharma. It's going to hit regulatory. Now you're still going to have manual intervention because we're not just going to let it run off and make decisions. But you're going to have somebody that really understands. Most people don't understand how complex it is right now and how much it can do. I mean, we went from this point of, Chat GPT, where you're saying, hey, write my entrance exam, to all of a sudden they yank off chat because they don't want to just think it's just text. And they go to GPT-4, and now it's generating videos and content and images that are photorealistic. And then it used to be locked down to what was it? The internet in 2021. And now they just updated 2022. So it's now have access to everything. If it's
pretty powerful. Yeah. So far I've seen a lot of, I've seen different use cases in the Amazon space. And I think there are, it's pretty impressive, from analyzing reviews in bulk and obviously generating content. I think it ultimately will make it easier for for folks to get started, I guess, right?
If you're not using it, you have to be. I think that's the weirdest thing. Is it used to be, okay, AMS, you're not using it, you might have some time to figure it out, right? Okay, ad tech, you might have time to figure it out.
Right.
You don't have time. You should have started a month ago, because it's creating content real time for all these products, and it's constantly looking at and optimizing for, the A9 algorithm. Like it's unbelievable what it's doing, and you'll fall behind if you're not like experimenting with it right now.
Yeah.
So that's what's really interesting, is I don't think people realize how quickly they have to pick it up. It's just scary.
And it's evolving so quickly. I think that's what's so remarkable, right? If you just think about like the past 6 months, all the improvements we already saw, and I mean, let's see. Let's see where it takes us. But I agree with you that if you're not using it, at least not thinking about it and playing around a little bit, I think you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table.
Yeah. What are you most excited about? What gets you pumped?
I mean, obviously, I'm working on this new project, Prism, and then this entire market intelligence, the market awareness. That's definitely something that that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I think that gets me very excited. I think the outlook on I mean, I'm thinking about another answer than AI, because I think AI is kind of the standard answer right now. But I do think it's truly impressive. I'm using it, for instance, for taking notes. Like all my meetings, like I have a note taker that just joins, and man, the summaries are really good. Like the minutes that you get from it is just really good, right? So it's like all these small helps that you can get along the way, and that make your work, not just your Amazon life a lot easier, but also your work life a lot easier. I think it's actually pretty remarkable. I was just planning a trip, like a weekend trip recently, and it's so amazing when you enter, like, look, I want to start here, I want to end there, I want to spend, I don't want to spend more than X hours at a certain location on these things, and you get a perfect plan back. So it's quite. It reduces your time to plan things like this by quite a lot. So I think I'm really excited about this. I mean, there's also a certain degree of concern, I'd say, right? But overall, I guess the opportunities will outweigh the concerns, and it's just about how we're going to incorporate this properly in our lives.
Yeah, I think right now we have the opportunity to potentially slow down how quickly it advances, but we're going to rapidly get to a point where we don't have a decision in it.
Right. We're just passengers.
Yeah.
Passengers. Yeah, it's gonna do whatever it wants with us. Right. Yeah. I mean,
I had this old group of books. My dad read a lot of Isaac Asimov way back in the day, the I, Robot series.
Yeah.
Robots of Dawn. Mm-hmm. And I've read the series a few different times. And people probably seen the movie, but the books are phenomenal. And you're basically looking at it like, he basically predicted the future.
Right. I mean, it's always interesting. There is a saying in the tech space, right, that you typically overestimate what can be done in 1 year, but then you underestimate what can be done in 10 years. And I think that's kind of the example, right? So I've been, if you've been following all these things, things were okay the past years, but it wasn't great. And then suddenly, boom. You just have this massive progress. So it's good stuff. Yeah. No, so I'm actually quite excited about this. And then let's see. I'm also bringing back to the e-commerce space. I mean, one area that I think is quite interesting is this entire Shopify versus Amazon I'd say battle, right? Which I feel now past year or so was talked a bit less about. I think Shopify is a bit, it's not the hype anymore, but I think it doesn't mean that it's not relevant anymore. Shopify is massive. And I think this battle between those two and how strategic they try to be about things, about like shop, the marketplace and so on. And then Amazon with the checkout that you can have on the websites and so on. And so I think strategically, if you think about e-commerce, I think this can have a pretty big impact on things. So that's something, but yeah.
That's going to be fun. And while they're fighting it out, you just have big commerce slowly growing and growing and growing. And at enterprise level, you have like a commerce tools. If you're a multi-billion-dollar multinational company at this point in time, like commerce tools from a headless platform is like one of the only like options out there. It's
okay.
Really truly composable commerce. It's like, yeah, but Shopify and Amazon duking it out. And then there's people over in the corner just like, hey, you know what?
Let me just take over the top of the market.
Yeah, wait.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, Franz, thanks so much for your time today. Really,
my pleasure.
Really appreciate you jumping on. And I mean, you just blew my mind. I think this is where things are going, that it just gets more and more and more complicated. And we have the different tools that are, as hit a pain point, tool comes out, hit a pain point, tool comes out. And people don't quite realize, I think what you're hitting on is there's a pain point that we're just getting to the point where we realize that we're restricted on how well we can spend our advertising dollars and conversion rate and everything else. And so really appreciate you and your time today. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks, Franz.
Thank you. Bye-bye.